Nothing that we see today going on in comics could have happened if not for Spain and the underground comics movement.
Spain Rodriguez broke down so many doors. It was a very, very boring, corporate, childish medium before he started making his comics.
He always punched up. He went after the ruling class.
You know, the struggle has to go on.
Hello, Jeff.
Susan, good morning. How are you?
I'm doing well.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you for talking to me about Bad Attitude, the art of Spain Rodriguez.
Yes, I'm happy to be talking to you.
You know, I'm a big comic book fan. I have been my whole life, and I really am embarrassed not knowing of Spain's history and his contribution. So this was a real eye-opening documentary. I knew of underground comics, who didn't? But
Right.
Coming from a Protestant Republican family, my mom was always in my room searching for things, so I could never get away with having underground comics. But he was a real trailblazer in the world of comics as we know today, wasn't he?
Yes, Spain was, and it's really fun to be able to share this history and to share his work, because he was really, he had a particular style, he had a particular vision that even in underground comics was different.
And I was one of those kids who could never draw. I was always growing up in grammar school and middle school, and all my friends, you see people doodling and stuff. I went on I could write, direct, and produce. I have a different kind of brain, but I could never draw. I was always so jealous of people who could. But Spain started early. He was one of those drawers in class, wasn't he, as a kid?
He was what I wasn't able to get into the film is his mother was an artist. And so he had that inspiration and maybe that talent. His daughter, who's in the film, our daughter, also had that talent, was just able to pick up a pencil at a very early age and draw. So he had that. But, it's too bad you didn't meet Spain, because Spain believed everyone could be taught to draw. I think we also see in the film him as a teacher, and he taught a lot of children to draw. Including
your daughter. He had patience with her. He looks like the kind of guy that would, he's very intimidating, but he seemed to have a lot of patience to teach how to draw.
Yeah, people felt intimidated with him throughout his life. I mean, he was an outlaw biker. Okay, so
the road vultures. Yeah, he was a biker. Yeah.
I know. Yeah, but he was very gentle, and he was a wonderful mentor to many young women too.
And he was also part of the underground press in New York in like 1966, the year I was born.
Oh, that was a fun story to tell, because I think you're right. A lot of people don't know about him or don't know about underground comics. When they do know about underground comics, they think it started in San Francisco with Crumb and Zap Comics. But really it started, well, many people will say it started in different places, but one of the places it started was New York.
And Spain moves to San Francisco, where he started and kept going with the underground comics with Zap. But also the women's movement was in full swing. So how did he kind of mesh in with the women's movement and the kind of material that he produced? Because it was, even though there's a lot of women that thought they portrayed women in a strong, positive attitude, but also it was kind of exploitative. So how did he mesh with the women's movement in that time?
Well, there's a big part of the film, and I think I'm really anxious to see how people feel about how it's treated in the film, because of course he was part of underground comics, which were very sexual. And actually the film talks about how there was a publication in New York called Rat Comics, and the women took over, kicked out all the men, and that was very much a part of the beginnings of the women's movement. Yeah, his work was very controversial. A lot of women felt that there's the issue of, if you draw a woman sexually, is she objectified? And I would argue that often in his comics, women weren't objectified. They were not objects, they were subjects. They were warriors, they were leaders.
And also Zap Comics, was his forte in San Francisco, but the obscenity law. So there were so many challenges to it. This was long before Larry Flint and Hustler magazine, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think Hustler and these magazines probably began around this time. I mean, one of the other things that's interesting in the film is it talks about EC comics, the comics in the 1950s, which really first began to be very sexy. And yes, this was before Playboy or any of that stuff. And those comics were suppressed. They were actually burned and banned. And underground comics came back and said, no, we can do this stuff, and really push the boundaries.
Isn't that crazy after World War II that in the 50s they would burn comic books? I mean, you think that would be freedom of speech and it'd be the parents who would be the ones who would guard their children? Because I saw some of those tales of terror, and I mean, those look really, they look really cool to me now, in today's terms, but I just can't believe he would burn those instead of just accepting responsibility, personal responsibility.
It's true. Well, there's very much a history in this country, of course, of censoring things. And it is a struggle now. What is, what is appropriate? What is so harmful to the public that it does need to be censored? And I don't think that certainly any of Spain's comics were.
And he became a family man. And you married him. You went to go interview him and you ended up moving in with him. Does that happen a lot in your business when you're doing? Okay.
It's true. It's true.
Yeah.
No, it's true. I think it does happen a lot in the business, but
But he became a family man. Did that change Spain much, or?
I think it did. He was a really great dad, his daughter will say, and will say in the film, and that's something that needs to be said as well. He did draw very erotic pictures of women, and that is controversial and certainly open to controversy. But to my knowledge, he was never accused of any sexual harassment or any of that sort of thing. And that matters. If we're going to say that it matters if people do that sexual harassment, even if their work is wonderful, I think then we also have to say, even if their work can be criticized, what was their life like? How did they treat women and other people? And he treated women with respect.
And like I said, I didn't know about Spain or his history, so it was, I came to know him through the documentary, and I didn't know that he battled with cancer at the end. So that was really sad for me. I personally lost my brother around Christmas, to cancer. So he went so quickly after like a month, and he looked normal. And then I just saw the pictures of Spain, how gaunt he looked, and until you're affected by cancer personally, it's just an abstract idea. And then I just, excuse me, I just went through the same thing, and I just saw how Spain looked, and I just immediately identified with that. So that was very sad.
I'm sorry that you went through that, but yeah, it's really true. There's in ways that this is also a film just about family and about loss and love. And what I liked about the film too, I love works of art where you get to see a whole life. We get to see the arc of a life, and then you see that we make these mistakes and we have these successes and we have blind spots in our lives, and we can maybe be more gentle about that.
Did Spain do a lot of Comic-Cons in his life, like San Diego?
He did some, and sadly, he got the Eisner Award, the highest award in comics, after he died, and I went to pick it up. And I'd been to the early Comic-Cons with him in San Diego 30 years ago, when it was like in an old hotel. There were a couple of weird people, maybe a few dozen weird people into comics. And now it's like, oh my God. But that's exciting too, because you see the effect comics have had on culture.
Well, because if I'd known he'd been there, if I knew his history, because they have them off in a corner somewhere, I would have made a pilgrimage to see Spain, and just meet him. Finally today, what about his archives and all his work? Do you have possession of everything? Is it going to be donated somewhere? Because I know in the documentary you showed a retrospective of him that was on display, but where is all of his life's work at right now?
Well, we do. The family has a lot of work, and part of what I did before making this film is we created actually a custom-made database and preserved all the work. So now we are in the beginning, his daughter and our daughter, we're in the process of deciding where the work will go and where his letters. I always say about Spain, he never met a piece of paper he didn't like. There's a lot of paper. He saved it all, and we organized it all. So now this will go somewhere to preserve the history of comics.
Absolutely. It deserves to be displayed somewhere and archived. Absolutely. And also Slamdance, your documentary is premiering there. Tell me about that experience.
Yes, I'm very excited to have the documentary premiere at Slamdance on the 12th through the 25th. For a $10 ticket, you can see all the films as many times as you want. Slamdance is a wonderful festival. It's the perfect place because Slamdance has a bad attitude, and this film has a bad attitude.
You could definitely say Spain had a bad attitude.
Yes.
But it was for the positive. Susan, thank you so much for joining me today and sharing your story with Spain. And come visit us in Las Vegas. We'd love to have you sometime.
I would love to visit you. Thank you for having me, Jeff.